Hey class, here's part A of what I refer to as the communication theory lecture. This is chapter 1 in your book, but really this chapter sets the stage for the rest of the course. In fact, not just this course, 1321, but any communication course that you would take, like Fundamentals of Effective Speech or even Mass Comm, they all start with communication theory, understanding what communication really is. And so on that note, I'm going to take us into this next slide. So this is chapter 1, part A, communication theory. And I'm breaking this lecture because it's usually a pretty long lecture because like I said, it does set the whole stage for the rest of the course. But I'm breaking this down into smaller parts. So I want to start this section by giving you some guiding questions to think about. Okay, and here they are. So what is communication? Which, yes, sounds like a no-brainer, right? Most of us could probably come up with some sort of operational definition for what communication is. But from a communication theorist point of view, from a communication field of study point of view, this becomes very important. We start to look at a rather complex process that we normally don't even think about because it goes like this. So we're going to break that question down. And we throw this term around a lot, don't we? It's like, they got a divorce because they couldn't communicate, or oh, I failed that course because the instructor and I had a miscommunication, or whatever it is. And so that's really the question that we're going to ask ourselves. And as a matter of fact, it's the question that the first set of communication scholars got together and asked themselves at the beginning of the 20th century. So, and that's going to come a little bit later. We'll talk more about that. So what is communication? And actually, when we say, oh, they had a problem with communication or they couldn't communicate, actually communication isn't the problem. The problem is miscommunication, right? Why do so many miscommunications occur? And that's the second question I want you to think about. And look at the word miscommunication. Quite literally, if you break that word apart, it's a communication that has missed. Okay, and those are that's the problem. Miscommunication is the problem. And especially for businesses, for organizations, every year organizations lose millions of dollars, and I'm not exaggerating this, millions of dollars due to miscommunications. And I'll give you an example, a quick example of one. And a lot of them are just kind of silly, but they cost a lot. They cost the organization a lot of money. So my sister worked as a marketing manager back in the 80s, right? And she ended up working at a company called Morningstar, and they produced those coffee creamers. I don't use them anymore. So, but it was called International Delights. And it was a little carton, and they had different flavors like hazelnut and cinnamon and amaretto and all that fun kind of thing. And the carton, it had the carton, it had a little picture of the coffee and whatnot, the steaming cup of coffee and, this and that. Well, so my sister told me a story of a miscommunication that happened down at the factory level. They had different machines, right? So you have one machine that actually spits out the big pieces of cardboard, and then another one stamps the pictures, the flat picture of what that carton is on top of the piece of cardboard, and then you have another machine that assembles it into the carton, right? And then it moves down the line, and then of course the creamer goes into the carton. So there was a miscommunication, and someone didn't understand what they were supposed to do, or didn't, again, this all has to do with miscommunicating. And in any case, either put the cardboard, it's not cardboard, but the board that the little carton, the initial carton in wrong. And of course, these machines spit out, thousands of cartons. within minutes or less. And when the carton was assembled, the picture was upside down on the carton. So you had all this product that was full, sealed, had the creamer in it with the sealed and everything, but they had to throw them out because the picture on it was upside down. Can you imagine? So very costly, right? Thousands of dollars of product down the drain because of a simple miscommunication where someone didn't understand how to load the machine correctly. So that's just a quick example, and that's why businesses and organizations are very concerned with communication, because the third question is what we sometimes fail to remember is that when we miscommunicate, when there is a problem with communication, when the communication is what we call disturbed, so there's a lack of shared meaning, it's a disturbed communication, it's missed, there is a cost. So I just gave you an example. Sometimes that cost is money, sometimes that cost is time, sometimes that cost is a relationship. Quite frankly, sometimes the cost is lives. I've had lots of military people who have given me examples of a miscommunication on the field, and that's cost lives. So we sometimes forget that, because a lot of our miscommunications sometimes are silly, some of them can be even humorous, but we forget that there's a cost. And so, of course, the next logical question then is, how do we minimize the potential for miscommunication? And that's a little bit covered up there, but that's what that question is. How do we minimize the potential for miscommunication? And we're going through these slides, but you do have, under the handout tab in Blackboard, you do have the Chapter 1 Communication Theory lecture guide. So you have this all on a handout that you can download. So and follow along if you wish. So I want you to think about those questions. And so the two other questions we're going to take a look at as we proceed, not in the part A, but as we go through this whole Chapter 1 lecture, is what is rhetoric? And rhetoric is the art of public speaking, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Rhetoric is really the early origins of communication. And so we're going to come back to that question and talk about that a little bit more later. And then also, what is the transactional model of communication? Because that's really what's going to concern us, is the communication model. Okay, and that's in your book. That's the diagram. And again, that's going to be in another part to this lecture. And as a matter of fact, the transactional model of communication is going to actually help us answer what is the first question, what is communication? So there you go. So who cares? You're probably wondering, all right, so whatever, we know what communication is, who cares? Well, again, this can be quite serious on a personal level, right? For your relationships, your job. If there's a miscommunication at work, sometimes you can lose your job. But so we're going to kind of focus on these miscommunication costs. And as I said before, businesses lose millions of dollars a year because of miscommunication. I gave you that example. I'm going to give you some other examples. And some of these are old. Okay. They come from earlier editions of your book, Communicating for Results. This is the 11th edition, and they did replace some of these with some updated examples, but I don't think they're as good, to be quite frank. So some of these are old, but I think they really serve the purpose of showing how kind of simple errors, simple miscommunications, and not thinking about different frames of reference and language and clarifying the message and all of that can cost us. So the first example says Dr. Pepper. So how many of you out there like Dr. Pepper? You like the soda? Because that's what we're talking about. And I don't know. I wish I could see you in class. People raise their hands. It's fun. But so if you're a Dr. Pepper drinker, more power to you. So I'm going to move to this next slide to tell you a little bit about it. And there was an old commercial back in the 1970s, right? And it was a jingle. What it was a jingle. And let me explain a little bit about this in case you don't know. Because nowadays we don't see this happen as much. Now when we watch a commercial, typically the company producing the product has, more often than not, they use like an old rock song or an old pop song that somehow goes with their product, the sale of their product. And I'm sure they pay the musicians royalties and whatnot. But back in the 70s and a little bit later, if you were a starving musician, right? If you were trying to make it big, you could pay the bills by writing what were called jingles. And you could sell these original scores, these original songs, to companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and whatever other organizations are out there that are selling products. So there were these original jingles, and you could pay the bills if they bought your jingle. Well, this one here is an example of that. It was a cute little song, and I was little. Okay, I was little. We would sing it on the playground. And this was a very successful advertising campaign. This commercial worked very well in the US. It sold lots of Dr. Peppers. Worked great. And you'll see in a minute. You can click on this. I'll click on it and see if it works here, but you can click on it yourselves. But basically, I feel the need to kind of give you my own rendition. So it kind of goes like this. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? Dr. Pepper, drink Dr. Pepper, right? Jazz hands. Okay, so very catchy. And again, made lots of money, lots and lots of money here in the States. Well, the company turned around. I think it's Coca-Cola that makes Dr. Pepper. They turned around and they used the same commercial in Great Britain, right? And of course, they already knew, they were already drinking Dr. Pepper. The name of the soda was not the problem, right? It was the commercial. And it didn't work. They didn't make any money. In fact, they lost money because of the commercial. And they couldn't figure out, why is this ad campaign with this cute little jingle working so well in the United States, but it's not working well here in Great Britain? Well, in the analysis, and I'm not making this stuff up, it all came from her earlier editions, they come to find out that pepper at the time was British slang for prostitute. Okay, so when the Brits are watching this commercial, here's what they're hearing. I'm a hoe, you're a hoe, wouldn't you like to be a hoe too? Okay, so of course they were probably laughing, laughing hysterically at the poor Yanks, right, who can't get this right. So it's funny, it's silly, but they did lose a lot of money. And I'll see if mine clicks on this while we're recording. Listen to it. Think about what the Brits are hearing. Okay, so there you go. And we would get it stuck in our heads too, that cute little jingle. But anyway, uh, they lost millions of dollars. That's an example of a miscommunication. Then another example, and this is an older one too, is the Chevy Nova. So this was a very popular car, sold very well in the United States, because think of what Nova means. Nova is an exploding star, right? So yeah, man, we're gonna go. It kind of implies this car is gonna go fast. It's really cool. Who knew? Well, GM turns around and tries to market the Chevy Nova in Mexico, okay, in Mexico. And it doesn't work. This car does not sell in Mexico, right? And they can't figure out, again, why it's a good little car, it's selling well in the States. Well, again, according to Cheryl Hamilton in the analysis of what went wrong, it's the name. In English, Nova is the exploding star, but in Spanish, it's the Chevy No Va, the Chevy No Go. And who the heck wants to buy a car that's not going to go? And again, this sounds really silly, but this is what happened. This was what the analysis revealed. And again, the cost was millions of dollars. Again, there was lots of money down the drain. You know, and it's funny, it reminds me of this. There's this place over here. I happen to live on the west side here by UTEP. And there's this old Arby's. There was an old Arby's that shut down. And the Arby's then became, and that business, like, I think the business now is the Hoppy Monk, but it used to be an old Arby's, and it went through all different restaurants bought it, different owners bought it, and it never made it until now. But one of the businesses that bought it was a chicken restaurant. Okay, that's all they sold was chicken. And are you ready? They called the restaurant the Fowl Place. Fowl, the Fowl Place, because fowl means bird, right? Fowl. But they were punning on the wrong thing because it's semantics. Foul is also foul, Foul, as in gross, bad. So the association, I think, is why that place went out of business so quickly, because who wants to eat at the Fowl Place and get foul? You get it? Okay, anyway, class. But seriously, these things matter. And in this case, that name cost the owners their business because that place did not stay open long at all. So the Chevy Nova, so there's another example. And for you space buffs out there, I don't know if you've been following all the fun things with Mars that have been happening with SpaceX and Elon Musk and the private-public partnership that they also have with NASA and all the great discoveries we're making on Mars. Well, and then also it was years ago, so probably over a decade, and sorry class, I'm getting interrupted here. But it was probably, I don't know, more than a decade ago that we may have actually already have gotten to Mars and maybe even been there as colonists if this hadn't happened. So the very first Mars orbiter, okay, the very first Mars orbiter that was sent into space was built by Lockheed Martin, okay? And Lockheed Martin, I don't know if you know, is a British company, and they built the spacecraft, okay? But NASA controlled the spacecraft, and I'm talking about one of the very first Mars orbiters, okay? So here's why does that matter? Well, when measuring the force of the control thrusters that keeps the orbiter in orbit around Mars at a particular distance so it doesn't get sucked into the atmosphere, well, guess what? Lockheed Martin used pounds for that computation, and NASA used newtons. And as you probably recall from your elementary and high school science classes, a pound and a newton are not equivalent. So consequently, the orbiter was not the correct distance away from Mars and was too close to the atmosphere, and consequently got sucked into the atmosphere and exploded, and millions and millions of dollars and lots of time and money quite literally up in smoke. And these are rocket scientists making this mistake, right? So that's another example for you. And finally, my last example is COVID-19. And this is an updated example, right? One of the arguments is that the reason why we didn't do so well with COVID-19, and of course it's a new virus, so that goes along with it, is because there were so many mixed messages. We received so many mixed messages, and that there was a lack of a national plan for how to handle the virus at the beginning. At the very beginning, when the virus was hitting, the government chose to kind of leave it to the states and kind of make it a patchwork quilt. And so one of the arguments is because there wasn't a standard national plan at the beginning, that caused a lot of the mixed messages and confusion, and perhaps we could have prevented deaths. In this case here, the cost is lives. And then it got politicized, and we end up with the mask wars. And then we end up with all this misinformation, right? Which isn't, misinformation is information that's not quite right. And disinformation is false information, okay? It's just plain false information, and it's kind of known to be false, and it's disseminated. So we had misinformation and disinformation about vaccines, etc., all of these different theories about COVID. And the other thing that impacted us and cost lives was the impact that the media had on us, our regular media, like the news, etc., but especially social media, because social media spread all this misinformation and disinformation like wildfire. So that's problematic. So now we have this new tool, and we're going to talk more about media and mediated messages and the impact of the channels, because that's what we're talking about. Channels is the way you send the message through phone, TV, email, Instagram, etc. The impact that actually has on communication. So in the case that we can apply all of this right now to COVID-19 and what happened here with the pandemic, and we're still trying to kind of fight through all of these different mixed messages that we're receiving. But it seems like there's light at the end of the tunnel, class, so that's good news. And so now I want you to think of your own example. Think of a time from your own life when a miscommunication cost you something. Okay, so you can just kind of think to yourself, and as we go through this material, what's a time from your own life that a miscommunication cost you something? What happened? What did it cost you? And what do you think caused the miscommunication? Can you diagnose what went wrong? And if you could go back, how would you communicate better? Well, stay tuned, because the answer to what is communication and what is the transactional model of communication will help you actually diagnose the situation, your particular miscommunication, and help you improve for the future, and hopefully not cost your organization millions of dollars. And I'll give you a quick little example of mine. And unfortunately it worked out okay. And this sometimes happens in text messages because a lot of times information gets omitted. So what happened was, we had a pretty important meeting that was taking place at Rio Grande campus for the administration. And fortunately, we arrived an hour early, and my colleague had texted me and wanted to know the room number. So I told him, whatever the room number was. Oh, we're in room 33A. And we're waiting and waiting, and my colleague was quite punctual, so we couldn't figure out where he was. So then he texts me and he says, well, where is room 33A? I'm walking all over Valle Verde. In my text, I had forgotten to tell him or omitted the fact that it was at Rio Grande campus. So thank God he had plenty of time to get there, but it was quite embarrassing and it was my fault. And part of it was the channel, part of it was the text. So we'll talk about all of that. So think about that and stay tuned for the next part.